There are moments in life when the world stops. Not because something extraordinary happens, but because something ordinary hits differently. You're standing in a room. Maybe it's a meeting, maybe a family gathering, maybe a confrontation with someone you once trusted. You're not yelling. You're not moving. You're just there. And yet somehow the entire energy of the space has shifted. Everyone is looking at you, waiting, reacting. And all you did was nothing. Not silence in the weak sense of the word, not the silence of fear or hesitation or uncertainty. This was the silence of power, of presence, of a kind of strength that didn't need to prove itself with noise. Think about the last time you were pulled into an argument. Maybe it started small, a disagreement, a sarcastic comment, a passive-aggressive tone. You felt your jaw tighten, your chest heat up, your fingers twitch, words flooded your brain like a storm. Comebacks, explanations, accusations, defenses. Your whole body prepared to fight, not with fists, but with words, with noise, with desperation disguised as confidence. And maybe you said what you needed to say. Maybe you made your point. Maybe you even won the argument. But later, in the stillness that always follows the storm, something didn't feel right. You felt drained, maybe even a little embarrassed, like you had revealed too much, like your control had been borrowed, and then stolen, by the person who pushed your buttons. You see, this is what most people never understand. Power isn't always about having the perfect response. It's not about cleverness, loudness, or dominance in the moment. True power begins in the place most people fear the most, in silence. Because silence makes people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people reveal themselves. They talk too much. They explain too much. They start unraveling at the seams, filling the air with words that say more about their insecurity than their intellect. Meanwhile, the one who remains silent, the one who chooses not to engage, isn't losing. He's observing, measuring, controlling the rhythm of the entire interaction without saying a word. Now imagine this. You're in a meeting room with two people. One is loud, animated, clearly trying to prove a point. His hands wave in the air. His voice rises with every sentence. His eyes flicker to the crowd, searching for allies. His body leans forward like a boxer desperate to land the final blow. The other, he's calm, still. He listens. He doesn't flinch. He lets the noise crash like waves against a rock, unmoved. And when he finally does speak, it's short, clear, surgical, and the whole room leans in. Who really won that interaction? Not the one who said the most, but the one who made every word matter. You see, we live in a world addicted to noise. Social media shouts, news headlines scream, group chats buzz. Everyone wants to say something. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone is terrified of being forgotten. But the truth is, power doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being felt, and to be felt, you have to first learn to pause. That pause? It's not empty. It's not silence. It's pressure. It's tension. It's the moment before the thunder, the silence before the verdict, the quiet breath before a decision that changes everything. That's where power lives. You've probably met people like this, people who never raise their voice, never rush to explain, never seem thrown off, and yet somehow they hold a room. When they walk in, people notice. When they speak, people listen, not because they demand attention, but because they earn it without ever asking. How do they do it? They don't chase validation. They don't argue to be right. They don't react to every poke or jab thrown their way. They operate by a different rule. A rule that says the moment I let you make me react, I've already lost. Because reacting means surrendering control. It means letting someone else dictate your emotions, your tone, your energy, and slowly, without even realizing it, you become a puppet in their game. But silence is not surrender. It's strategy. It's the pause that makes the other person wonder, did I go too far? It's the look that says, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just deciding whether or not you're worth the answer. It's the quiet confidence that tells the world, I don't need to be loud to be heard. There's a kind of person who understands this naturally. They're not flashy. They don't chase clout. They don't speak just to fill the air. But when they do speak, it's as if the world tilts slightly in their direction. You can feel their words land, not because they're louder, but because they're backed by something most people never learn to cultivate: inner authority. Inner authority doesn't come from titles or money or followers. It comes from self-mastery, from knowing your emotions so well they no longer control you, from being so rooted in who you are that someone else's opinion can't shake you, from recognizing that in almost every situation, the one who stays calm, stays in control. That's the trick, the silent trick, the one they never taught you in school, never mentioned in the self-help books that scream about speaking your truth, or standing your ground, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say nothing at all, not because you're afraid, but because you're above it. The next time someone tries to bait you into a fight, a petty debate, a back-and-forth spiral of ego and noise, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what do I gain by engaging? What do I lose by staying still? More often than not, you'll realize, silence is not only protection, it's power, and those who learn to master it, they don't just win arguments, they win respect, they win influence, they win the game before it even begins. We grow up believing that arguing is power, that the louder you are, the smarter you sound, that standing up for yourself means firing back, that to win, you have to fight, that silence equals weakness, and confrontation equals strength. But that belief is a lie. It's a performance, a loud, exhausting performance that most people give, because they're terrified of what silence might reveal. They confuse noise with presence, they confuse reaction with relevance, and in doing so they give away the one thing they were trying to protect: their power. Let's ask something uncomfortable. Have you ever found yourself in the middle of a debate, saying things you didn't fully believe, just because you didn't want to lose, just because you didn't want to look small, just because someone made you feel cornered, and you needed to fight your way out? We've all been there. And when it was over, did it really feel like you'd won, or did it feel like you'd revealed too much of yourself, like you'd lost control in your rush to prove a point? You see, most arguments aren't about truth, they're about identity. When someone disagrees with your opinion, it doesn't just feel like they're challenging an idea, it feels like they're attacking you, your values, your intelligence, your worth. And so we react, not because we want clarity, but because we want validation, because we want to be seen as right, respected, superior. But here's the catch: the more emotionally you argue, the more control you surrender, the more you need to be right, the more you reveal your weakness, because the person who can provoke you owns you. They say one sentence, and suddenly your blood pressure spikes. You defend, you justify, you yell, you chase their approval without realizing it, and with every word, they pull the strings while you dance. This is the illusion of power in arguments. It feels like strength, but it's often fear in disguise. Fear of being seen as wrong, fear of being disrespected, fear of being insignificant. But real power, it doesn't need to fight for recognition. It doesn't need to defend itself at every turn. Real power is quiet, calm, measured. It doesn't need to win arguments, because it wins people. Let's take a step back and look at what actually happens when you get pulled into an argument. Your brain doesn't switch into logic mode, it switches into survival mode. You're not analyzing ideas anymore, you're protecting your ego, you're scanning for threats, you're preparing to fire back. And in that moment, you're not leading the conversation, you're being led by it. That's why arguments rarely lead to clarity. That's why people rarely change their minds during debates, because their nervous system isn't listening, it's defending. So while you think you're proving your intelligence, what you're actually proving is how easily you can be controlled. And the more you argue, the more you expose your pressure points, your insecurities, your fears, your emotional triggers. The louder you speak, the clearer you make it. Someone else got under your skin, and the person who stays calm, the person who listens quietly, doesn't flinch, doesn't rush, doesn't play your game, that person is in control, not of you, but of the entire frame. They're not trying to win, because they already have. They've claimed the highest ground, the one where restraint rules and silence commands. This is why the most powerful people in history didn't waste their breath on endless arguments. They didn't chase every insult, they didn't respond to every provocation. They understood that energy is currency, and spending it on ego battles was a poor investment. They knew something most people never learn: you don't need to win every argument, you just need to win the right ones. But in a world that rewards noise, that kind of control looks strange. People ask, why didn't you respond? Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you fight back? As if silence isn't a response, as if stillness isn't strength, as if dignity isn't a power move. Let them ask, Because what you're building isn't for those who measure strength by volume, it's for those who recognize it in presence. The truth is, arguing doesn't make you powerful, it just makes you visible, and being visible isn't the same as being respected. Anyone can raise their voice, anyone can fight back, but not everyone can stay composed. Not everyone can choose silence when their ego begs for revenge. Not everyone can sit with discomfort and let others reveal their own weakness through their need to dominate. That's not cowardice, that's mastery. And here's something even deeper: when you stay silent, you become the mirror. You reflect the other person back at themselves. You give them space to speak, to expose their own contradictions, their need to be right, their desperation to control, and most of the time, that's all it takes. They unravel without your help. They keep talking, not because they're sure of their position, but because your stillness is making them question it. You've planted a seed, not through argument, but through absence. Because when you don't react, people start reacting to you. That's influence. That's what the illusion of argument never teaches you. So ask yourself the next time someone pulls you into a verbal storm, what are you really fighting for? Is it clarity, or is it comfort? Is it truth, or is it validation? And is it worth your energy? Because every time you speak, you reveal something. Every word is a thread someone can tug on. But when you choose your words like a master chooses his next move, you don't just speak, you shape. And when you choose not to speak, you dominate the space in a way no volume ever could. The illusion is over. You don't need to fight to be powerful. You don't need to prove anything to hold presence. Power is not in the noise. It's in the one who controls the frame. So the next time someone tries to pull you into an argument, ask yourself, am I here to react, or am I here to reign? Because the difference between the two is the difference between noise and legacy. There's something unnerving about a person who doesn't flinch, a person who doesn't raise their voice, who doesn't react the way you expect them to. Someone who watches, who listens, who holds the silence like it's armor, like it's a blade, like it's something more dangerous than anything you could say. Because silence isn't empty, it never was. We just never learned to look closely enough. Most people were raised to believe that silence is what happens when you don't know what to say, that it's weakness, passivity, a gap to be filled, something to rush through, skip over, interrupt with noise. But they were wrong. Silence is not the absence of power. Silence is power, not the kind that needs applause, not the kind that feeds off validation, but the kind of power that doesn't beg to be noticed. It commands it. And the ones who truly understand this, who master it, are the ones who never need to prove themselves, because their presence says what words never could. This is where psychology meets philosophy, where the modern science of influence finally catches up to something one man saw centuries ago. Friedrich Nietzsche. He was called a madman, a radical, a heretic of conventional thought, but buried beneath the boldness of his words was something timeless, an idea so powerful it still echoes through the corridors of modern psychology: the will to power. But here's the mistake people make. They think the will to power is about domination, aggression, crushing others to rise above. They think it's about shouting louder, pushing harder, reacting faster. But Nietzsche never glorified brute force. His Übermensch, his Superman, wasn't some savage beast overpowering the weak. He was a master of himself. The Übermensch didn't rise through noise. He rose through restraint, through control, through a kind of unshakable inner strength that didn't need to defend itself, because it was never truly threatened to begin with. Modern psychologists would later echo the same idea. They found that the most influential people in any room aren't the ones who dominate the conversation. They're the ones who control the temperature, the ones who choose their words like they choose their battles, rarely, wisely, and with impact, the ones who don't raise their voice to assert dominance because their energy already commands attention, the ones who let others burn themselves out in a frenzy of emotion while they sit still in the center of the storm. It's a kind of self-control that's misunderstood in our world of overexposure, a kind of stillness mistaken for hesitation. But it's the stillness of someone who knows. You don't have to react to everything. You don't owe anyone an answer just because they asked a question. You don't need to speak just because someone raised their voice. Because your silence, if held with intention, says more than any speech ever could. That's the heart of the will to power. The ability to control yourself so fully that others can't help but respond to you. And isn't that what power really is? Not forcing the world to bend to your words, but influencing it through your energy alone. Let's break it down even further. Psychology tells us that humans are wired to interpret silence as dominance. When someone doesn't fill the space, when they're comfortable with pauses, with stillness, with tension, it sends a message. I don't need to prove anything. I already know who I am. And in that moment they flip the dynamic, because now it's you who's uncomfortable. It's you who feels the pressure to speak, to explain, to perform, and they haven't said a word. This is not manipulation. This is presence. Presence rooted in self-mastery. Presence that Nietzsche believed was the mark of a higher human, not one ruled by instinct or emotion, but one who chose his reactions, one who chose when to act, and when not to, one who wasn't owned by the moment, but owned the moment through clarity and purpose. Nietzsche called this man the Übermensch, the one who rose above herd thinking, above ego games, above petty conflict, not because he never struggled, but because he had transformed the struggle into strength. And that's the kind of power silence gives you. The power to stay calm while others panic. The power to observe while others expose. The power to choose, not react, when everything inside you wants to scream back. It's not passive. It's dominant. You see, anyone can argue. Anyone can speak without thinking. Anyone can react. But only the powerful can wait. Only the powerful can watch. Only the powerful can walk into a room, say nothing, and still shift the entire atmosphere with the weight of their presence. That's the kind of power the world doesn't teach you. Because that kind of power can't be sold. It can't be borrowed. It has to be built from within, and it begins the moment you realize, you don't need to win arguments to win influence. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to dominate people to dominate the space around you. You just need to master one thing yourself. Because when you master your reactions, your energy, your presence, you master the frame. And in every interaction, there is always someone controlling the frame. It's either them, or it's you. And silence, that's your tool, your pause, your edge, your power. So the next time someone tries to pull you into chaos, remember this: the Übermensch never enters battles that are beneath him. He doesn't waste his energy on noise. He doesn't chase recognition, because he doesn't need the world to clap. He already knows he's holding the sword, and he knows how dangerous it becomes when it stays sheathed. That's the truth about silence. It's not passive. It's not weak. It's the ultimate expression of power restrained. And when you master it, people don't just listen to you, they follow you. Because power, real power, doesn't live in what you say. It lives in what you choose not to say, and when to say it. Power through silence doesn't always show itself in grand gestures or epic moments. Sometimes it reveals itself in a single glance, a single pause, a single question that makes the room go quiet. Because there are 3 layers to this kind of power, each one deeper than the last, each one quieter, sharper, more controlled. And once you learn to master them, people stop seeing you as ordinary. They begin to feel something they can't explain. A shift in presence. A shift in energy, a shift in you. Let's walk through each one not as theory, but as living, breathing moments. Real examples. 3 minds from 3 different worlds, who all use silence not just to survive, but to lead, to conquer, to become immortal. Imagine this. Athens, 400 years before Christ. A dusty courtyard, the chatter of philosophy floating through the air like the hum of bees. A crowd gathers, not around a king, not around a warrior, but around a man in simple robes. Socrates. He doesn't look like much. He's not loud, not physically impressive. But when he speaks, something strange happens. He doesn't shout. He asks one question, then another. There's a wealthy politician standing across from him, full of pride, full of himself, full of quotes and speeches and titles. He thinks he's wise, thinks he's above scrutiny. Socrates doesn't argue. He simply leans forward and asks, "What is wisdom?" And the politician answers, proudly, confidently. But Socrates keeps asking. Each answer the politician gives opens another hole, another contradiction, another exposed assumption. The crowd watches. Not a single insult is thrown, not a single attack. And yet by the end of the conversation, the man who thought he was the smartest in Athens can barely finish a sentence. He's unraveling, drowning in his own words. choked by his own contradictions. Socrates didn't need to prove him wrong. He made the man prove himself wrong. That's the first layer of power through silence. Let others carry the weight of their own ego until it breaks. Ask questions. Then listen. Watch. Wait. Because the strongest force in any debate is the one who never raises his voice, but still makes the room tilt in his direction. Now shift scenes. Silicon Valley. It's the early 2000s. You walk into a design lab at Apple. Tension is thick. Engineers are arguing. Developers are frustrated. Everyone's fighting over one idea, the design of the iPhone. They want buttons, physical keys, something familiar, something safe. But one man sits quietly at the head of the table, Steve Jobs. He doesn't explode. He doesn't scream. He listens. He watches them debate, watches them defend their limitations, watches them argue for why things can't be done. Then, he asks one question: what if we didn't have buttons at all? And the room freezes. People resist at first. They fight back. They push all the reasons why it won't work. But Jobs doesn't push harder. He lets them speak. He lets them believe they're leading the conversation. But he's not following. He's steering. Carefully. Strategically. Quietly. And slowly. Something shifts. They stop defending the past and start imagining the future. The same engineers who said it can't be done begin to believe in the impossible. And when the first iPhone is finally revealed to the world, there are no buttons. Just a screen. One seamless piece of glass. And millions of people watch, mouths open, as history changes forever. That's the second layer of silent power. You don't argue. You guide. You don't dominate the room. You shape the air inside it. And the people who thought it was their idea don't even realize you planted the seed. Now one last story. A misty shoreline in feudal Japan. Two men stand on the beach, facing each other. One is Musashi, an undefeated samurai. Quiet. Focused. Unmoved. The other Kojiro, a legend in his own right. Faster. Flashier. Famous for his deadly sword style. The duel was meant to start at sunrise. But Musashi doesn't show up. Minutes pass. Then an hour. 2. 3. Kojiro grows restless. Angry. Pacing in the sand. Gripping his sword tighter and tighter. His honor's been insulted. His rage boils. And then hours late, Musashi arrives. But something's off. He's calm. Relaxed. He doesn't apologize. He simply steps onto the sand like he's stepping into destiny. Kojiro is fuming. His hands shake. His breath is uneven. His rage makes him fast, but sloppy. And in seconds, it's over. Musashi strikes once, and Kojiro falls. That's the third layer of power through silence. Musashi never fought the man. He fought his mind. He turned silence into a pressure cooker, turned time into a weapon, turned stillness into a trap. Because when your opponent is emotional, he's already defeated. This isn't about battles. This is about life. And most of the battles you'll ever face, arguments, betrayals, power struggles, aren't really about logic. They're about emotional control, and the one who controls that, controls everything. So what do these three men have in common? Socrates, Jobs, Musashi. Different eras, different worlds, different enemies. But one weapon. Silence. Not the silence of fear. The silence of strategy. They didn't chase attention. They shaped it. They didn't dominate with noise. They bent reality with presence. And they didn't rush to speak, because they knew the most powerful voice is the one that speaks only when it chooses to. There's a dangerous belief floating in the world today. A belief that says you always need to defend yourself. That silence is submission. That if you don't speak you lose. If you don't fight back, you've already surrendered. But what if that belief is the very thing keeping you powerless? Because the truth is, not every battle deserves your sword. Not every conversation deserves your voice. Not every insult deserves an answer. There are moments in life where speaking up isn't strength. It's a leak, a drain, a trap. And power, real power, is knowing when not to speak. You've probably felt it before, that burning sensation in your chest when someone questions you, insults you, disrespects you. Your mind races. Your pride kicks in. You have to say something. You have to set the record straight. But stop for a moment. What are you really defending? Is it truth? Or is it your ego? The ego is a fragile thing. It disguises itself as strength. But it's terrified of being exposed. That's why it flares up when someone mocks us, questions us, ignores us. But here's the catch. When you react out of ego, you lose every time. Because the person who triggered you, they now own you. They said one sentence, and they made you move. They got under your skin. They pulled a string, and you danced. That's not power. That's emotional slavery. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, ask yourself a simple question. Am I defending truth, or just protecting my pride? Because if it's pride, silence is your sword. Hold it. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to convince someone who's already made up their mind. You bring facts. They twist them. You bring calm. They bring chaos. You try to reason. They try to win. These are not debates. These are emotional loops, psychological quicksand. And the more you talk, the deeper you sink. It doesn't matter how right you are. It doesn't matter how much logic you bring to the table. If someone isn't open to change, if they're just looking to be right, then your words aren't conversation, they're background noise to their ego's monologue. In that moment, your silence does more than words ever could, because silence ends the game. It shows you're not playing, and nothing confuses a person who wants a reaction more than not getting one. Not every argument is about ideas. Some are about dominance, control, territory. It happens in boardrooms, relationships, friendships, family dinners. People pick fights not because they want clarity, but because they want to establish position. They want to make you feel small so they can feel tall. They want to interrupt you, talk over you, control the pace, the tone, the mood. And if you take the bait, if you engage emotionally, you become a piece in their game. But if you stay quiet, if you keep your energy grounded, your voice calm, your gaze still, you flip the board. You take the air out of their lungs. You force them to fill the silence, to overcompensate, to show their need. Because when someone is arguing just to dominate, your calm silence becomes a mirror, reflecting their desperation. And when their control tactics don't work, they lose their power. You keep yours. You're in a room with someone who doesn't argue to understand. They argue to win. They twist. They manipulate. They wait for you to slip up. It could be a toxic boss, a jealous friend, a partner who plays psychological games. They ask you questions, but they're not really listening. They're hunting, looking for weak spots, loopholes, evidence. And when you give them a long explanation, when you try to clarify, when you speak emotionally, they smile, because now they have material. They'll clip what you said, reword it, weaponize it. Your words were honest, but now they're a loaded gun, aimed at you. This is when you must remember, silence is not surrender, it's protection. You're not running, you're conserving, you're not weak, you're watching. Let them talk, let them guess, let them try to decode your stillness, because the more they guess, the more they reveal, and the less you say, the stronger your presence becomes. When you master these moments, you'll begin to notice something incredible. People around you will start to behave differently. They'll become more careful with their words, more curious about your thoughts, more aware of your boundaries, not because you told them, but because you didn't have to. Your silence told the story. Your restraint wrote the rules. Because here's the truth. Speaking all the time is easy. Defending yourself is easy. Fighting every insult is easy. But power is choosing your battles. Power is knowing which wars are won in silence, not in sound. Power is the self-control to look someone in the eyes and say nothing, not because you're afraid, but because you already know you've won. There comes a moment when silence is no longer enough, when presence alone won't shift the room, when the pause has done its work, and now, the blade must leave its sheath, because silence is power. But when you speak, after silence, that's when you become unstoppable. The world assumes that the quiet ones stay quiet forever, that the one who didn't react in the first round won't respond in the second. They mistake restraint for retreat. They confuse composure with passivity, and that's their first mistake, because the ones who master silence are the ones who master speech. They don't speak to fill space, they speak to change it. They speak when the words carry weight, when every sentence lands like a decision, when every word is chosen like a weapon, and when they speak, people don't just listen, they lean in, because they can feel it. The shift, the gravity, the pause before their voice wasn't empty, it was building tension, and now the release is coming, and it hits harder than anything loud ever could. There are moments when silence is strength, but there are also moments when silence is cowardice, pretending to be wisdom, when avoiding the fight means letting the wrong energy win, when the storm doesn't need to be waited out, it needs to be confronted, and the question isn't whether to speak or stay silent, it's when, because when you speak too soon, you lose your leverage, when you speak too late, you lose your chance, but when you speak with purpose, on your terms, with timing, clarity, and impact, you don't just win the moment, you reshape it, you turn the frame upside down, you make others question everything they said before you spoke, you turn your voice into a pivot point, the moment the conversation bends in your direction, and never comes back. But how do you know when that moment has arrived? It's simple, speak when silence has served its purpose, when the room is leaning forward, when your opponent has revealed their fear, their need, their weakness, when you've watched long enough to see the cracks, when their argument is wobbling under its own weight, and all it takes is one sentence, not a punch, but a scalpel. That's the first sign. The second, speak when what you say will move something, not when it will prove something. Proving is ego, moving is power. Proving makes people defensive, moving makes people shift. That's the difference between argument and transformation. And real leaders, they don't speak to win debates, they speak to change direction. You know when a word is right, you feel it in your chest, calm, cold, grounded, not urgent, not panicked, not emotional, just deliberate. Those are the words that change minds, and not just other people's minds, your own, because there will come a time in your life when silence turns inward, when the world pushes you down, when you go quiet not out of choice, but out of pain, and in that moment, your power won't come from what you hold back, it will come from what you finally decide to say to yourself. That moment when you look in the mirror and say, enough. That moment when you stand up, not in rage but in clarity. That moment when you draw the line, not for them, but for you. That's when your voice becomes your rebirth. That's when your silence ends, and your command begins, not as noise, not as revenge, but as truth. There's a rhythm to power. It begins in stillness, builds in observation, peaks in precision, and explodes in decision. Words, when used right, don't need backup. They don't need repetition. They don't need applause. They don't even need to be remembered. They just need to land. And if they're spoken from the place of silence, from the place where your power was stored, and sharpened, and made undeniable, then they will land hard. You'll know you've spoken correctly when the room doesn't answer immediately, when they freeze, when the air changes, when people look at you differently, not because of what you said, but because of how still you were before you said it. That's power, not the kind you scream, the kind you drop, and then walk away, because power doesn't beg to be heard. It speaks once, and echoes. So the next time you're in a situation where your silence has held the tension, where your restraint has built the moment, and you feel the shift inside you, the calm before the verbal strike, trust it. Don't raise your voice, don't explain too much, don't justify your existence. Say what needs to be said, and stop, because real power, it doesn't explain, it declares, it doesn't ramble, it lands, and then it lets the world respond to its gravity. Say what needs to be said when it matters most, and watch how people look at you, when they realize, you were never quiet because you were weak, you were quiet, because you were waiting, and now they'll hear you, loud and clear. Let's turn the lens inward for a moment, because everything we've talked about, silence, restraint, presence, timing, it's not just about dealing with others, it's about dealing with yourself. It's about the war that happens inside you every single day. The war between who you are, and who you pretend to be, between the self you defend with words, and the one buried beneath the noise. Ask yourself, when was the last time you were completely silent, not just in voice, but in thought, when you didn't rehearse comebacks, when you didn't replay the argument in your head, when you weren't crafting responses, or building your defense, when you just sat in stillness, fully aware of how much you've been reacting to things that don't even matter. Silence isn't always peace, sometimes it's a confrontation with the truth you've been avoiding. The truth that the voice in your head isn't always yours. It's built from old arguments, past pain, childhood wounds, moments when you weren't heard, weren't seen, weren't validated, and ever since you've been trying to fix that, with noise, with explaining, with proving. But what if I told you, the proving was the problem? What if the moment you need to prove something, is the moment you've already started losing yourself? What if the one who needs the last word, is the one who never actually believed in their first? What if silence wasn't avoidance, but evolution? You've been taught to speak up, to be bold, to push back, to argue. And yes, there is power in voice, but voice without awareness becomes noise, and noise becomes camouflage. You hide behind it, hoping people will see you through it. But the truth is, no one really sees you until you stop performing, and no one feels you until your energy is still. You've probably noticed this already. The most magnetic people aren't the loudest, they're the ones who move with intention, who don't speak to fill space, they speak to shape it. You notice them without trying, you listen without knowing why, because their silence doesn't just say I'm in control, it says, I don't need anything from you. That's the real twist. Silence is attractive, silence is mysterious, silence makes people wonder, it forces their mind to work, to reach, to fill in the gaps, it creates tension, and humans are wired to resolve tension. When you stay still in the middle of chaos, you make others lean in, you make them chase your energy, and once they start chasing, they give you the power. But let's go even deeper. Why do we argue at all? Why do we feel this burning need to respond, to clarify, to be heard? Because somewhere deep down, we're afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being underestimated, afraid of being erased. So we talk, we over-explain, we raise our voices, not because we're strong, but because we're afraid that if we don't, we'll disappear. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if the more you talk, the less people hear you? What if the one who disappears isn't the one who stays silent, but the one who won't stop defending? Because here's the truth that turns the entire idea of power on its head. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to speak first or last. You don't need to respond to everything. You just need to choose. Choose when to hold still. Choose when to speak. Choose when to walk away. Because power is choice, not impulse. And the one who chooses owns the moment. So now, let's make it personal. Picture the next time someone challenges you. It could be a coworker, a partner, a stranger online. Someone looks you in the eye and throws something your way, an insult, a question, a trap, and you feel that fire start to rise. You feel your body tighten, your mind preparing the perfect response. But instead of reacting, you pause, you breathe, you say nothing, and in that pause, you watch them shift, you watch them get uncomfortable, you watch them reveal themselves, and in that silence, you become unshakable. That's the moment you stop being reactive. That's the moment you stop being controlled. That's the moment you become the one holding the strings. Not by overpowering others, but by not needing to. Because the ones who chase the argument, they're showing you their need. But the ones who don't, they're showing you their freedom. So here's the question I want you to carry with you, not just for today, but every time the tension rises, every time your ego itches to speak. Am I reacting, or am I choosing? Am I speaking because I want to, or because I need to? And if I don't speak right now, what happens? Do I lose anything, or do I gain everything? Because the one who speaks out of reaction gives away power. But the one who holds silence makes everyone else listen harder, not because they shouted, but because they waited. And when they finally spoke, the room remembered it. So the next time you're pulled into a battle, remember this: you don't win when you shout the loudest, you win when you don't have to shout at all. That's the power they never teach you. But it's the one that changes everything. You've seen it your whole life. The loud ones, the boastful ones, the ones who interrupt, who posture, who throw their weight around in meetings, in arguments, in conversations. And you were told, that's power. That if you wanted to be respected, you had to play the same game. Be sharper, be louder, be quicker to speak, faster to respond, harder to shake. But it never felt right, did it? Because somewhere deep inside, you knew real power doesn't need to prove itself every 5 seconds. It doesn't talk over people. It doesn't rush to defend itself. It doesn't perform. It doesn't beg to be seen. It just is. And when it's present, you feel it, not in your ears, in your spine, in the stillness that enters the room before a single word is spoken, in the calm that radiates from someone who knows exactly who they are, doesn't need you to know it to believe it. Because that's the real meaning of power. It's not control over others, it's control over yourself. It's being able to walk into a room full of chaos and remain untouched by it. It's listening while everyone else talks, observing while everyone else reacts, thinking while everyone else is scrambling to win a moment that doesn't even matter. Power isn't in being first, it's in being precise. It's not about silencing others, it's about being so composed, so internally grounded, that their noise can't enter your peace. The real meaning of power is found in presence. The kind of presence that doesn't shrink to make others comfortable, and doesn't expand to make others impressed. It's steady, natural, inevitable. And the ones who carry it don't force it, they become it. You don't chase conversations, you don't need the spotlight, you're not trying to outshine anyone. Because the truth is, the sun never competes with the stars, it just rises. You stop caring about being liked, not because you're cold, but because you've realized that being liked is temporary, and being respected is eternal. You stop needing to defend every idea, not because you lack conviction, but because you've learned that conviction is loudest in silence. You stop explaining yourself to people who've already made up their minds, because you've seen what that does. It empties you. And now, you protect your energy the same way a king protects his kingdom. Not with walls, with standards. There's a moment that comes when you begin to operate differently. You no longer move from fear of being misunderstood. You move from clarity, from stillness, from a place of deep inner knowing. You realize that your words don't need to be many, they just need to be right. And when you do speak, people hear you in a way they never did before. Not because your voice got louder, but because your silence gave it weight. You've probably felt that shift before. The moment when you're about to answer back, but you don't. Not because you're scared, because you don't need to. You've already won the moment, by refusing to be dragged into the smallness of it. You didn't chase the approval, you didn't feed the argument, you didn't light the fire, you just stepped back. And the silence that followed, that wasn't weakness, that was command. Because true power is not reaction, it's selection. It's knowing that your energy is currency. And some situations, some people, they aren't worth the cost. So you don't engage, you observe, you stay still, and when the time is right, you move. And when you move, things change. Not because you're forceful, but because your stillness was never passive, it was coiled in tension, and when it's finally released, it doesn't just push, it pivots reality. You're not chasing control anymore, you are control. You're not chasing impact anymore, you are the impact. You don't beg to be heard, you speak, and the world leans in. Because that's the real meaning of power. It's not measured by how many people fear you. It's measured by how many people listen when you speak quietly. By how many people pause when you enter the room. By how often the chaos stops when you simply stand still. So here's what I want you to ask yourself. Not just once, but every time you feel the urge to rush into a response, to fight a battle, to win a moment. Does this make me powerful? Or just loud? Does this move something forward, or just keep me spinning in place? Does this make me more in control of myself, or less? Because that's how you measure power, not by what you say, not even by what others hear, but by what shifts in energy, in direction, in outcome, when you finally decide to speak. And if nothing shifts, then maybe it wasn't power, maybe it was noise. But you don't move in noise anymore. You don't live in reaction, you don't speak just to be heard. You speak to create silence in others, and when you do, that's when you'll know, this is what power feels like. So now you've heard it all, you've seen the truth, felt the pain, remembered your fire, and glimpsed what your life could be. But none of that matters, if you leave this moment unchanged, because this is it, the fork in the road, the line in the sand, the choice that separates the men who rise, from the ones who vanish. Right now there are two futures standing in front of you. One is the same path you've been walking, the cycle, the guilt, the silence, the shame, the distractions, the delays, the numbness, the excuses. That life you keep pretending is fine, even though you feel like something is dying inside you. And the other, it's raw, it's hard, it demands more than you've ever given before, but it will lead you to everything. The focus you've lost, the strength you crave, the energy that used to surge through your body, when you were still connected to your purpose. It leads to a life where you don't just exist, you build. Where you don't just get through the day, you own it. Where you don't chase pleasure, you create legacy. But you can't walk both paths. You can't be the person who's triggered by every opinion, and also be the one who commands respect and silence. You can't be the person who reacts, and also be the one who controls the room. You can't live loud for the wrong reasons, and expect to be heard when it matters most. So here's the challenge. For the next 7 days, speak less, observe more, hold your silence like it's something sacred, something expensive, something not everyone gets access to. Stop explaining yourself to people who aren't ready to understand you. Stop defending ideas to people who are more invested in winning than learning. Stop fighting to be right, when your peace is worth more than being correct. Just watch. Watch how people react when you don't react. Watch how they shift, stumble, repeat themselves, reveal their insecurity. Watch how silence makes them uncomfortable, and how that discomfort makes them expose more than they ever meant to. And then, say one thing, only one, each day. Make it count, make it cut, not with cruelty, with clarity. Let that one sentence carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts, and when you do speak, don't raise your voice, lower it. Because the lower your voice, the more the world leans in. This is how power begins. This is how your transformation starts. Not with noise, not with rage, not with sudden explosions of emotion, but with stillness, with calm, with restraint. That's what makes people listen. That's what makes them respect you. That's what makes them follow your lead, without even realizing it. And once you've felt that level of power, you'll never chase attention again, because you'll know something most people never figure out. You don't need to be seen everywhere. You just need to be felt where it counts. You don't need to be loud all the time. You just need to be undeniable when it matters. So take the challenge. For 7 days, hold your tongue when your ego wants to respond. Let people say what they need to say. Let them assume. Let them unravel. And while they do, you build something stronger than approval. You build presence. You build patience. You build that deep, rare energy that can't be faked or bought or borrowed. You build real power, because the world already has enough noise. What it needs now is someone who can move it with silence, and that someone might be you, but only if you start now. So go, try it. And when the noise gets loud again, when someone pokes, prods, pushes you to react, just pause. Smile. Just a little. And remember, they only push hard when they know they don't have you. And you've already won, because when you stop needing the last word, you become the only voice that matters.